We'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sean Baser, and I'm a fourth year PhD student here at the Institute and coordinator of Research Roundtable alongside Matt Gregory. Before we begin today's panel, just a few housekeeping items overall. Again, this will be the final Research Roundtable session of the year. Matt and I hope you have found these sessions informative and useful. If you're interested in leading Research Roundtable next year, please reach out to me or Matt. Thank you to those who have already expressed some interest. And a needed sidebar. Many thanks to Matt for his leadership on Research Roundtable over the past 2 years. He ensured the legacy of this valuable resource that it lived on. Really, without him, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you, Matt, for always taking that role the last 2 years. Second, thank you to those who attended and provided feedback for ARA conference presentations at our last Research Roundtable event. I's presentation improved greatly as a result of the feedback, and Matt's premature closure of the Zoom room prepared us all for the ARA platform. Third, Dr. Jeff Harding realized he did not share contact information at his session last month, so he wanted to pass that along and reiterated that IHE students shouldn't hesitate to reach out, as he's happy to serve as a resource. I've placed his email in the chat here in a second. And for those watching on the recording, please reach out to me or Matt, and we can forward along this information. Finally, as Amy kind of alluded to a little bit ago, Dr. Rossinger sends her apologies for not being able to participate in today's panel. She extended an offer to IHE students that she would be happy to talk individually with anyone regarding applying for dissertation grant funding. And with that being said, I'm thrilled to kick off today's Research Roundtable, a little giddy as well. We have composed an all-star panel, and I mean it, faculty and graduate students from both within and outside of the IHE community to provide insights about dissertation grant funding from multiple perspectives. Today's panel would not have been possible without Dr. Stitch, Suzanne Graham, and Christina Carter. Thank you for your continued support of Research Roundtable, both in getting some of our presenters, as well as just technical support throughout this scheduling. So the structure of today's session is as follows. Each panelist will spend about 10 to 15 minutes to share their experiences around dissertation grant funding. Presenters will speak in the order of appearance on the registration. We'll begin with Dr. Weis, who will provide general insights from her experiences as a reviewer for the National Academy of Education and the Spencer Foundation's Dissertation Fellowship. We will then move on to our dissertation grant recipients, who will provide a brief overview of their funded projects, the topic, research questions and methods, and highlight specific tips for dissertation grant writing, as well as the benefits of receiving such awards. At the conclusion of the panelists' presentations, Dr. Stitch will then open things up for a discussion with our audience members until our time ends around 5:15 to 5:30. And with that, I'll let Dr. Weis have the floor.
Okay, thanks a lot, everybody, and thanks for inviting me. So it's really a pleasure. I love these kinds of sessions, okay? And I'll say more about that in a minute, but I just want to clarify my role. It's not just that I'm a reviewer on some of these grant proposals. I mean, that may be the case, but I actually have sat on the selection committee for 4 years. So I want to just clarify the process. And I think one of the things that people never know is, like, how do people get these things, right? I mean, what's the process by which these things happen? And the more people understand that, I mean, it's not easy, it's never easy, but the more we can democratize access to these things. And I've really, frankly, fought very hard to make that happen. We can't have all these high profile grants going to, I'm not talking about certain individuals, I'm talking about going to certain institutions. The institutions have to be more widespread than just a small number. And it's not as simple as to say, I'm just going to use the example of Yale, but in fact, I don't think I've even ever seen a proposal from Yale on this particular thing, but it's not as simple as to say that there's some kind of signaling theory of Yale or signaling theory of Harvard or all that. In other words, that somebody sees that and they're so enamored with the name of the institution that they're going to say, wow, we got to fund that person. It doesn't work that way, but there are things, there's a sort of a structure of capitals that enables people from particular kinds of institutions to get these to a greater extent than people from other institutions. And that has to be stopped. And I have to say that Spencer National Academy is taking this very seriously and has been doing better. So I'm not saying it's attributable to me, but I certainly haven't harmed that happening. Okay, so we really have to get, and the more we can get the word out on how these things actually happen and what really quote unquote counts when we sit at those tables, the more people understand what the process is and what's really important when we do that. So that's the kind of unmasking that I try to do when I give these kinds of talks. I sat on the selection committee for 4 years. The selection committee rotates. It's always very amiable process, by the way, and it's people are sitting there from a wide variety of disciplines, fields, and so forth. The whole purpose of the Spencer Academy Dissertation Fellowship is to fund the next generation of scholars. And I say that only because when you have to write a personal statement, and if you write a personal statement and people don't interrupt this personal statement and you say, I really want to be a teacher in a school, nobody's going to say that that's bad. I mean, of course, right? People should want to do those kinds of things, but that's not what these dissertation fellowships and postdoc fellowships are for. The processes are exactly the same for dissertation and postdoc fellowships, although the tables are different. In other words, there's a committee for the postdoc fellowship, there's a committee for the dissertation fellowship, and they operate in exactly the same way. So take care when you write those personal statements, because this is to fund the next generation of scholars in education, so that the kind of really good, interesting, excellent work that we are producing in education will continue to go forward in the next generation, and that's what it's for. So Spencer, when you get, again, it's not signaling theory. It's not people say, oh my God, it's so amazing. You got a Spencer, therefore we're going to hire you. That's not true. But what happens at the tables at the Spencer Foundation, National Academy Spencer Foundation, when you're being mentored, is that you learn a lot of things, and they bring in the funders and they bring in all sorts of people to critique your work that really give you a leg up on going forward. I mean, certain things that people have never unmasked for us, okay, for all of us before. And that's a huge thing. And that's really the value of what actually happens in this program. I know Amy has sat at those tables. I know she can talk about this. And Katie Reeb-Reascos has sat virtually, but they're actually bringing you back next year because it's so important that you actually meet these people in person, sit at the tables, have everybody hauled in there all together, and also meet the next generation of people. I mean, Amy, I only know this because you told me, but I don't know that you would have met Anthony Jack, for example, had you not met him at a meeting. And it's that kind of, again, networking is such an imprecise term I don't even like, but it really is the case that you become a community when you're involved in these kinds of things, and you meet people that you might not otherwise meet because you don't happen to be on a panel with them, or you don't happen to be on whatever with them. So that's the kind of thing that really is incredibly valuable. The empirical data definitely bear this out. I mean, there was a wonderful study using propensity score matching, looking carefully at what happens to people. It's not the postdocs, because that's a different kind of issue, but with the docs, what happens to people when they get a doc, to what extent do they have a leg up going forward? And it's Adam Gamron and Larry Hedges, and it's very, very clear that the kind of metrics that they were using indicate that these fellowship programs actually have an impact on the extent to which people get money going forward, the extent to which they publish in tier one journals, and so forth. So we have a lot of data on that, and it's really quite an amazing experience, actually. So it is really important that we get the word out on these things. And so let me just give you some what I call tips. I'll go through them as fast as I can. Please stop me if I seem to be going over here. First of all, you have to have a very significant research question or a set of questions that's scaffolded by the academic literature. I mean, that seems obvious, right? I mean, we think, oh, of course, but it's not as obvious as one thinks. I mean, you have to be doing something that's going to move the needle in a particular area in a very precise kind of way. So that's point number one. These are things to think about moving forward. Number two, here, this one is very much misunderstood, I think. Make sure your method is meticulously outlined and explained. If you don't live and breathe the AER standards on publishing in AERA journals, get them and paste them right by your computers so that they're in front of you at all times, because that's the kind, you have to be very meticulous about outlining your methodology. And if you don't do that, you know, people sitting at that table are going to say, well, how many people? What do the people represent? In this case, I'm talking about a qual person. Or for the quant people, you know, what kind of models are you putting together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people sitting at that table, that very diverse group of qual, quant, historical, philosophical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, people, scholars sitting at that table are going to know the right questions to ask. So it's the kind of thing one doesn't learn. I'm sure you learn it there. Okay, but you don't learn this all over the place. This is, you have to go to particular institutions to have people tell you these things very explicitly. So that statement's incredibly helpful, walks you through whatever needs to be taken account in engaging research. Again, graduate students, you should encounter it in your methods classes, just in case you don't get it. It's very, very specific. I edited AERJ. Actually, Amy worked with me on that. And we lived and breathed that thing. And so do the granting agencies. So it's something to take clear account of. 3, this is a controversial statement. Some of you may hate me for this, but I would be very, very careful about using the term grounded theory. Now, let me tell you why I say that. Okay. I mean, everybody sitting at the table knows that theories developed and enhanced via new empirical research. Okay. I mean, we all know that, of course. But Spencer's nor any other funding agency, in my experience, they're not going to give us money to invest in, they're not going to invest in projects that don't take account of the literature, what we already know in any given area, because why would they fund us? I mean, we're not part of ongoing conversations. We're not likely to move the needle. And I'm going to tell you exactly what one member of the committee said when I was sitting at the tables here. Quote, I tell my students that if I see the term grounded theory in your dissertation proposal, I stop reading right there. Now, fair or not, I mean, by the way, I happen to agree with that, but fair or not, there's enough people sitting at a table like that. They're going to see grounded theory and wonder if you know what you're doing. So don't do it. It's kind of that simple. It's an easy strategic move. There's other ways of talking about how you're setting up your project than saying that you're not going to take account of anything that we thus far know. That's a very serious mistake. And if somebody tells us that, they're not going to get very far in this process. Look, let me say one other thing. Any proposal that comes to Spencer, doc or postdoc, is going to go through a first round of external reviews. In other words, they're sent to scholars in the field, not the ones sitting at the table. Okay, but they're sent to scholars in the field, and those write-ups are actually in the dossiers when people sitting at the selection committee tables finally see them. So they're going out, and there's a cut made. If those external reviews don't suggest that this should go forward, then they're not going to go forward anyway. So take account of these kinds of small things that I'm saying, and don't make these kinds of please don't make these kind of basic errors. We can challenge a lot of things, but there are some things worth challenging. And the use of the term grounded theory is, in my opinion, not worth challenging, because you're going to lose. Okay. Okay. 4. Similarly, be really mindful of the term mixed methods. People sitting at that table know what that means. And we did, actually, it was myself and Margaret Eisenhardt and Greg Duncan, who's what I like to call high quant person. He's a very, very fine quantitative sociologist. And the 3 of us headed up a committee, not a committee because we proposed it and got money to do it, but the 3 of us headed up a group, which was a working group on the use of mixed methods in, I don't remember what we called it, but mixed methods in important issues in education and interdisciplinary, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember what we talked, but we actually worked for quite a long time on it. The whole process took 2 years, and we published with commentaries and examples of good mixed methods work in Teachers College Record about, I don't know, October of 2019, perhaps. It was a while ago, maybe 2020, I'm not sure. But it's a large report, and I know for a fact that people read it, and I also know that Spencer takes account of it as they think about these things. I'm not saying mixed methods is bad. Mixed methods is great. Just take the basic cut, quantitative and qualitative, okay? And I do understand all the nuances underneath that stuff, okay? But let's just leave it simple for the moment. Quantitative and qualitative, and it's really very hard in one study to use both methods. And more importantly, it's really very hard for any individual to be so highly trained in both those methods that they're going to come across credible in a grant proposal. I personally, no matter, even with a team, I personally have never gotten a grant proposal funding that called itself, that attempted to do mixed methods work, because the questions always are, one, how do you do both? And then secondly, perhaps more importantly in the big teamwork, how does one method leverage the other method? And that's a really good question. So I have seen some recent mixed methods proposals that have been funded from doc students and postdoc students, but postdoctoral associates, excuse me, that have been funded, but those people are really highly cross-trained in both areas. And therefore what they're proposing is very credible, and they can answer that question, how does one method leverage the other? Like, why bother? Where mixed methods is incredibly important is if you have some qual data, for example, right? A study was done qualitatively, and then you want to move forward and ask a question that is a quantitatively driven question, needs quantitative methods. And then you put together a team in such a way that you can actually do both those things. That's the way to fund mixed methods research. So just be careful, because any proposal that comes across that is clearly a high quant proposal, and there are many, that says, well, I'm adding this qual component and I'm interviewing 10 people, it's going nowhere, okay? And vice versa. A really fine qual piece of work that adds descriptive statistics is going to go nowhere. I mean, that's not a sophisticated enough piece of work that they would put the money into it. And the question is this all about getting the money in this particular case and funding good work? So just be careful. Please get a hold of that pub that we did. I think it's very valuable. We've gotten lots of good feedback on that thing, and other funders have responded to it. For example, WT Grant Foundation, et cetera. By the way, the funders were on our committee, okay? We were very careful who we chose. We chose X number of top scholars, and we chose X number of funding agencies. Spencer was one, but they also were funding this thing. So it wasn't just Spencer, it was National Science Foundation was there, IES was there, et cetera. Russell Sage was there. I mean, there were a number of them sitting at the table with us, and we actually collectively figured this out and put together this document, and I know it is being used. So just be careful when you think about these kinds of things. And like I say, I've never gotten a mixed method study funded. I have gotten them funded sequentially. So we do one piece, and then we use that data to leverage another piece, which takes into account another method, and then that has been funded. And then we can think through what to do with it. Okay, 5. Choose your letter writers very carefully. Those of you who are PhD students, I'm sure you have plenty of people at UGA who know how to write letters. But if there are people, and I'm not saying anywhere in particular, but there are people who think that a letter is saying, even for entrance into a doc program, is saying that, somebody works hard, or they were good in class, or they're interesting. That goes nowhere. Your letter writer has to know your study in and out, and has to be able to address exactly how that study is both well conceptualized and is going to be well executed methodologically, that you have the skills to write it up and move forward. And that's the only kind of letter that's going to help anybody. The other general letters about somebody being helpful or nice or whatever it is, they're not useful at all. So just choose your letter writers carefully, and ask your major professors who you can ask to be your letter writers, because they know who the people are who can help. Again, it's not the names. I'm not interested in somebody's name. I'm interested in what they say when I look at the letters of recommendation, and I see them, okay? As a member of that committee, I see all of them. And it's all about, the successful letters are all about the work and how they move the needle and how the person is trained in such a way that they can do the research because they have the training and they've done it before in their prior work in the program. So that's a very important thing to think about. In that regard, back up your request for letter writers. In other words, you've got to give people 6 weeks to write a letter. They're really busy. And you have to have this, you have to think if Spencer's due whatever, October 1 or November 1, whatever it is, one is doc, one is postdoc, usually one is October 1, the other is something like that. The other is November 1, back it up. Like you've got to be well on your way right now if you're thinking of doing this for fall. Okay, just in terms of outlining what it is you want to do moving forward. You don't have to ask your letter writers yet, but you have to have an idea. And you have to be working moving forward on this. Quant people has its own set of expectations. And I mean, I was very fortunate to be cross-trained, and it has its own set of expectations. You've got to do prior analyses, initial analyses to make the case that there's something to study here. So I'm sure if you're working with the top quant people, if you're a quantitatively trained individual at UGA, and you have to make sure that follows those sets of conventions. Qual people, same thing. You really want to have, I tell everybody to have some pilot fundings, because those pilot fundings are going to allow you to say, I have a finding here, an initial finding, and I want to test it further. And that's if the topic's persuasive for the committee, then the selection committee and the reviewers, if the topic's persuasive for those people, then the fact that you have those pilot fundings suggesting that you have an idea as to what you're going to focus on is very persuasive. It makes it a much more persuasive case. So I'm just thinking of the University of Buffalo, this is what we tell people. And we actually structure our doc program to make sure that people, they may or may not know that this is why we do it, but we structure the doc program to make sure that people come out of there with pilot data that they can use to position, whether quant or qual, they can use to position for a grant for these agencies. A good quant agency, by the way, that funds a lot of good stuff is AERA. AERA does not fund qualitative. Not that they don't do qualitative, but in their dissertation granting program, they fund quantitative studies. Okay, that's not true for Spencer. Spencer funds a range of studies. Qual people, this is point 8. Your method has to be meticulously outlined. No statements like, well, I'm going to interview 10 people without telling us exactly who those 10 people are. I wouldn't do 10 anyway, but you got to, what do those people represent? I mean, who are we talking about here? And of course, qualitative studies cannot talk about generalizability in the same way that quantitative studies do. We don't use that language of generalizability in the same way. In other words, a sample yeah, I'm just about done, Amy.
Thanks, Lois.
A sample to a larger population, but we do talk about intellectual generalizability. When I'm in a working class high school, I'm there for a very specific reason. And it's not just some random school that I chose. I chose it to represent a possible, or whatever school I'm in, an elite school. I chose it to represent a particular set of institutions. Okay, I'm just about done. Okay, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but you got to take, if you're quant, you got to take the rigorous quant courses. Okay, if you're qual, you got to take the rigorous qual courses. I'm sure you all do that, but just in case you don't, because everybody knows the difference when you're proposing methods. One other point I'm going to make, and then I'm going to stop. No, I'll make 2 more points quickly. So look, if you're doing this just for the purpose of having the experience of submitting a grant proposal, please stop right there. That is not worth your time or anybody else's time. It's just way too much work. Don't do it. And nobody should be submitting for these proposals unless they're done with their defense, or they're close to having a defense where they actually are in a position to do this. We used to not give comments back to people. We now do. So everybody gets some comments back from the selection committees. One more point and I'm going to stop. Going through graduate school, you kind of learn to have a pretty thick skin. In other words, you learn to take critique and so forth. If you don't have a thick skin and don't embrace critique, this isn't for you, because you're going to get it all the way along, starting in graduate school. And if you get pissed off and say, who are they to say that? I mean, that doesn't go very far. So you really want to say, you don't have to take all the critique, but you have to be open to hearing all the critique and then deciding as an investigator what you're going to do with that critique. I don't take all critique I get either, but I really want to hear it. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lois. That's great. Sean, I'll turn it over to you to go in order there. I lost sight of the order. I apologize.
No, I think Katie's
oh, Katie's next. Katie's next.
Katie's up next.
That's me. Yep. I'm honored to follow Dr. Weis. Okay, let me share my screen here. I do have a PowerPoint. Excuse me. Can everyone see that? Is it coming through?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I always
Looks great.
Thanks. I always like to double check that. Hi everyone, I'm Katie Reeb-Reascos. I am one of Dr. Weis's advisees up at the University of Buffalo. I'm a 2020 NAID Spencer Dissertation Fellow. I want to thank you for inviting me to this talk. I'm happy to be here, and I'm indebted to Amy for her help in the process of me getting to my through my grant writing phase. So I am absolutely delighted to be here. So thank you for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the study that I was able to get funded through the NAID, through the National Academy and Spencer. And then I'll talk a little bit about my process, because I don't feel like I'm at a point where I can give tips, but if I can share you my process and maybe you see something that aligns with you and aligns with what kind of works for you, I highly encourage you to take that and run with it and kind of work with it and however it best fits you, because we're all different, especially when it comes to writing. So that's where I start. So you see my very long title here for my dissertation, but I'm going to skip forward here to my questions. They're on 2 slides because they're very long. My study looks at, it kind of sits at an intersection of a few different fields. So, through the sociology of education, I'm really interested in the role of parents in the special education process, how their children get referred, how they get services, how they get placed in that process of special education. And through that, I kind of want to know how that process looks at different buildings, because we know from different, different research from special education and through many different fields that students with disabilities are, it depends on where you are and who you are in terms of what services you get. So for me, I kind of wanted to look at the process of referral, so that CSE, Committee on Special Education Referral, and how that looks at 3 different buildings, 3 different elementary schools, because that's where we know a lot of the referrals come from. So if you look, I used typologies, and unfortunately, for some reason, I did not put the citation from where I got that. That was Dr. Lee and Dr. Weis's work on matching, and that is an oversight, so sorry about that. But typology, so I'm at a suburban advantage, suburban mix, and a urban regular school. So I'm kind of looking at how school site factors affect the process and placement for these students with IEPs or individual education programs. So these are my second 2 questions. And the thing is, these were not my original dissertation proposal questions. I knew if applying through Spencer for this dissertation, I absolutely knew that I would have to craft a question that spoke to many audiences. I knew by nature of this work not having been done before that the people in the room looking at my work either wouldn't be aware of kind of how all of this worked, or by nature did not find it significant enough to study it themselves. So I said, how am I going to communicate how important this is to the people I'm going to be talking to, but to the larger conversation. So I kind of teased it out in terms of saying, like, listen, we know that there's an opportunity structure in education. We know that there are inequities for, by race and SES and gender and ability. So I tried to tie it into all of those threads of research to kind of just make my question speak to many audiences, but also to kind of really unpack the significance of what I was trying to study. So how did I go about doing this? My sample, if you can tell, so I had 4 methods of data collection. So I have my semi-structured interview with 3 cells of 21. So at the 3 buildings, I had a cell of 21 that involved different people who were involved in the site personnel side, right? So I had the special education teachers, general education teachers, school psychologists, the CSE chair, and anyone else for like a building administrator as well, plus parents. So I had that laid out at each site, so my suburban advantage, suburban mix, and my urban regular. And then from there, to understand where they worked and how they worked with children, I backed their what they were saying to me up with, well, I plan to, with site observations at the schools. So I plan to be in 3 different placement settings for at least 6 to 8 hours. So that is what I proposed in my study. And then for the parent side, for the 12 parents at each site, I was hoping to do focus group interviews once I got done with those individual interviews. And because special education does not work without documentation, everything's documented. I also brought in my 4th method in terms of data analysis. And when Dr. Weis says lay out everything, your methods and methodologies in a very explicit way, that is what I did. So mind you, today I'm not going to sit here and tease out exactly like all of it because we don't have enough time. But I poured over that section. That's what gave me heart palpitations at night. I said, I need to talk to top scholars in many different fields and say, trust me, this will get me to answer my question. That's kind of how you want to justify it, right? So let's talk about my process and what it looked like for me. It took a good 7 months for me to get from, I defended my proposal in February. I got the phone call from Dr. Weis later that week saying you need to apply for this. I kind of freaked out and said, where do I start? Right? So this is my personal journey, and I basically had to start with my own proposal. My proposal as a qualitative researcher proposing for my dissertation to my committee was about 75 pages. I knew looking at the requirements for the dissertation that I needed to get it down to what, 10 pages is it? 10, 11? I can't remember with references. I knew I needed to do some work. So I had to first step back from all of the months of work that I put into my dissertation proposal, and I had to ask myself, what exactly are you asking? What exactly are you trying to do here? And then I just started reading different things. I read other proposals. I had access through a proposal writing course that we had. I had access to Dr. Weis's, one of her proposals to NSF. And I kind of looked at how the language was crafted. And I just kept reading my work, and I kept reading other people's work. I kept reading stuff on how to write grants and how to write, grant proposals. And then I just started writing, and it was like, okay, let's go. Let's just start putting something on paper. And then I said, okay, great. 75 pages is down to 60. I'm moving in the right direction. And then, you start kind of just drafting and redrafting and redrafting. And that is from there, once I got it down to the ballpark where I was comfortable, I only selected 2 people to share my work with. I am not one. I do not like many cooks in the kitchen because at the end of the day, it's not that I don't value a lot of other, many voices. That absolutely works for me. But in terms of me figuring this out, I just kind of wanted to keep it smaller and people I trusted and specific to kind of what their specialty was. So it's like, you bring the sociology side of it, you bring the disability side of it, help, let's, help, and I got their feedback and worked from there. And then honestly, once I got it to a place where I was comfortable, I sent it to an editor. It was a former journalism professor of mine. I sent it to him. He sent me back the edits. Dr. Weis took a look at it, and then I submitted and I walked away because I could not fret over what's going to happen with it. I cannot fret with whatever it is. And I just said, have fun. I didn't know what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden you do forget that you had submitted it over time. And then you get an email and you're like, what is this? And then so it worked out for me. So that is my process. I just really understand what your work is and what you're trying to ask, because you want to put your best foot forward, and only you know exactly kind of what your big question and your big goal is. And then finally for me, because Sean had asked us to speak on the benefits of it, I will tell you the best thing for me through this work, on top of the networking and getting to the mentoring and those retreats, which mind you, mine were virtual this year. And of course, I got this great privilege during a pandemic, but that is fine. I'm honored to have it anytime. It really helped me understand my work and where I fit in the field. And I didn't have that clarity beforehand because I was kind of this person who was on the fence of different fields, and I'm kind of at this really weird crossroads, and I'm bringing different voices together. But it really helped me kind of find my footing. And it also gave me the confidence to say, I do belong here. I can do this work, because when you're working under such brilliant scholars who have been doing it for decades, you can get very intimidated very quickly. And it has helped me with confidence in terms of me finding my voice. And that is something that I struggled with for the longest time. The mentoring is second to none. I did not realize I would be sitting at these virtual tables with people. I'm like, whoa, I've been reading you for years and you're sitting here talking to me, asking about my work and getting excited about my work. Are you serious? And I've met so many wonderful people along the way, including, just my fellows and people who work at National Academy. And then I also got to meet the funders. So I highly encourage anyone who wants to be in this field to just don't be intimidated by the process. Give yourself the time to do it and go ahead and do it. So that's all I have today. I hope that, am I under the 10 or did I talk too short?
You just made it, Katie. It was perfect.
Oh, perfect. All right.
Perfect timing.
See what happens when you teach on Zoom, you get kind of better with the
Thank you so much. Incredible insights. And so we will now move over and direct our attention to Dr. George Spencer.
All right, I'm gonna share these slides. I was asked by presenters to put together some slides to help visualize what I'm going to present to you all in my remarks today. And I'll just preface this by saying that, first of all, I just want to say how good it is to see so many familiar faces. It's been a long time since I've seen many of you. It really is a pleasure to actually be a faculty member at IHE. And with that being said, I just want to say up front that I am always available to meet with any of you all who want to continue the conversation on dissertation funding and preparing a proposal. So you can always feel free to follow up with me individually if you want to just chat or receive some help. I am going a little rogue. Matt and Sean made the request that we kind of begin our remarks by talking a bit about our dissertation work, but I think that during my time at IHE, I've probably talked about my dissertation work at least a few times at this point, and I'm sure some of you just don't care anymore. And I think that as opposed to telling you more about my dissertation work, I think what I would prefer to do is maybe talk a bit more about process, try to provide you all with some tips and some advice. And I'll also just point out that, the tips are just my personal opinion. And so there may be some disagreement with the other presenters on the panel today. So if folks disagree, feel free to jump in, or even at the end, feel free to jump in to let me know, or the group know if you feel differently about any of the advice that I'm going to give. But I also am going to try to go under our 10 minutes because I want to make sure that you have a lot more time to hear from Jung, who's just recently gone through the experience, and I think you'll learn a lot more from her. So why don't I just start by telling you in terms of my goals. I'll start by telling you a little bit about my background and personal experiences, but also, as I said before, just telling you some very general advice, which I think is especially important because for my particular dissertation fellowship, not everyone will be eligible for that, but that doesn't mean that there still aren't some really good lessons and insight that I hope that everyone can take away from this presentation. So here's a really quick snapshot about my dissertation. Many of you know that I did some work looking at the effectiveness of statewide articulation policies using both institution level data as well as student level data. And I will use this as an opportunity to really just bounce off of some comments that were previously made by the other panelists about communicating what you're doing really clearly for a broad audience. That really resonated with me. It was one of the core pieces of advice that I was given in this process that I want to make sure I just take a minute to also just affirm. I think that for those of you who use quantitative research methods, especially, there are a lot of folks who aren't always really well trained at being able to communicate what they're doing to a broad audience. And I think it's really important to make sure that you are aware of the fact that whoever's reading your proposal may not necessarily have the same training or the same background. And so being able to communicate what you're planning to do to a intelligent but perhaps statistically naive audience is going to be really important. And that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I just made a point about on this particular slide. But the dissertation fellowship that I had the pleasure of receiving was the AERA Minority Dissertation Fellowship in Education Research. It is a program that is designed specifically to target members of minoritized, racially minoritized groups. And so for that reason, not everyone is eligible, but it is a program that is important with the intention of helping to diversify the faculty in academia. And so with that being said, I would encourage you, if you are eligible, to consider it. This is the one dissertation fellowship opportunity that AERA provides in which both quantitative and qualitative researchers are eligible. So there are a number of past winners I know who did fantastic qualitative research. Mine just so happened to be quantitative. And there's a funny story here, or at least it's funny to me, because I actually initially was not targeting this fellowship program at all. I was initially planning to apply for the dissertation opportunity that Jung has, the AERA grant, which she'll tell you about a little bit more, because very early on in my doctoral career, I remember receiving an email. You know how even at IHE, we send you all emails about different job opportunities, different internship opportunities. And, same thing was the case in my doctoral program. And I remember getting an email like, hey, doc students, those of you starting on this journey, there's this thing called an AERA grant, and it's available for folks who are using or planning to use any of the publicly available federally funded data sources for your work. And I thought to myself, like, wait, you can get money just for using these publicly available data sets? That to me sounded like a dream. And so I said, okay, that's what I'm gonna go for. And in the end, I ended up missing the deadline. So that actually is related to the first piece of advice that I want to give you, which I think also kind of bounces off of some other comments that are made, which is please plan early. Like if you're going to plan to apply for an opportunity like this, you don't want to try and rush this at the last minute, trying to piece together all of the different requirements. It really does take a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time, especially if you want to do it well, in particular, your prospectus. And so I won't go through all of these individual components because you certainly can read more about this on the website if you want to. But my recommendation would be, just like someone else mentioned, please get started early, preferably in the summer. Most of the deadlines, not only for the AERA dissertation fellowships, but also for many of the others that are available, including Spencer, tend to be deadlines in the fall. I mentioned before that I missed the deadline for the AERA grant. That tends to be like September. The deadline for the minority fellowship opportunity was a little later in November, which is why it ended up being a little bit better for me since I got a late start. The other thing that I want to mention as far as tips go are, consider working with your colleagues. Everyone has a different comfort level when it comes to, how you want to engage in this process. So if you don't really want to have other folks involved in your work, that totally makes sense. I'll speak for myself. I actually worked very closely with a small group of folks that actually was my writing group. I think I did one of these research roundtables last year where I made the same recommendation, and then so I'll make the recommendation again. If you don't have a writing group, I strongly recommend it. And one of the benefits of having a writing group above and beyond just holding each other accountable to, getting the chapters of your dissertation done and having a space for that and receiving feedback on your work. It's also just a great social and emotional support system. So you can celebrate your small wins, and you can also be there to support each other when there are inevitably the moments when you have some disappointment as well. But we also, above and beyond the dissertation work, we incorporated the process of planning to apply for dissertations together. So we actually moved forward with researching different opportunities together, because it's sometimes hard to remember. I think some of the big dissertation awards in education, a lot of people know about, but there are other opportunities out there that, if you take the time, if you're willing to take the time to try and find those opportunities, you may be eligible for some really great fellowships and grants out there. So feel free to go to, there are different resources on campuses, whether that's the sponsored projects office. At my institution, I had the benefit of actually having some resources cultivated for students. We had like a binder where they put together, the librarians at my particular institution put together past proposals and prospectus for current students to be able to read. So basically award-winning proposals from other students that we could go read and take a look at. And that was a really helpful resource just to be able to tap into, to find out like, okay, what are people getting funded for? Is that similar to, or are they getting funded for work that is similar to the type of work that I'm looking to do? How can I structure my proposal, which for many of you probably have never done in the first place? So there was a comment about democratizing the process. That for me was a huge opportunity to help democratize the opportunity of applying for dissertation funding and trying to understand how to do it. The other things that I would recommend are reach out to your colleagues. There are more than likely some folks in your network, or perhaps even in a network of your faculty members that you work with who have won these dissertation awards. I was really lucky to have some advanced students at my institution who I reached out to and were more than willing to share their resources with me. It was really great to benefit from the generosity of some of those more advanced students who just sent me their prospectus or some of their other materials, and I have done the same. So for students who reach out to me, hey, I know you won this award, can you share your materials with me. That actually is something that I continue to do even to this day. But working with a group is great. Keeping track of deadlines, giving each other feedback, and like I said, searching for and identifying different dissertation opportunities above and beyond some of the bigger ones that you may already know about. The other thing that I'll recommend is make sure that you're working really closely with whoever your advisor may be, or perhaps maybe even another faculty mentor. It's going to be really important to make sure that you stay in communication with your advisor in particular, because they do need to write a letter of support for you. And so you don't want to wait till the last minute, as was already mentioned. But the same is true when it comes to whoever your other letter writer or letter writers, plural, may be. So think about and work with whoever your advisor may be to think about who that person should be and how they can help to provide some new insight about who you are as a scholar. I also would recommend that you ask if they would be willing to provide some feedback on the prospectus. Don't expect that your advisor is necessarily going to read as many drafts as perhaps maybe a colleague, which is one of the benefits of having a small group or a writing group, because we were able to give each other feedback on multiple drafts. The other thing I'll mention about the writing group is I had folks in my writing group with different expertise. So I had one person who was a qualitative researcher. And so if they're reading my prospectus and they don't understand what I'm saying, it's helpful to know that, okay, I need to revise the language here to make sure that what I'm trying to say is accessible to multiple audiences. And the other thing that I wanted to just mention about working with a faculty member is to make sure that you are on track to advance to candidacy before the fellowship period begins. I know that a lot of people, when they apply, are already at that point. That's not necessarily always the case. That was not the case for me. And so with that being said, sometimes, hey, changes happen. And so before doing this presentation, I actually went back to look at like, what in the world did I propose to do? And it was pretty much the same thing, like what I ended up actually producing in the dissertation. But in terms of timeline, you know, I was in the process of working on my dissertation prospectus at the same time that I was preparing to apply for these dissertation funding opportunities. And so the reason why I'm just laying this out is so you can kind of see how, okay, I started with this idea, I was working with my advisor, they knew what I was working on, what I was planning to do, but along the way, based on feedback that I received from my committee, I made some changes, in particular to the research design. When I spoke with George Wimberly, who at the moment, I believe he still continues to oversee many of the dissertation funding opportunities for AERA. He actually told me that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for changes to happen from the period in which a proposal is submitted for a dissertation award and actually the final result. So don't let that intimidate you, but I will say that it is good if you are as close to or have a pretty good idea of what you want to do, which is why it's a good idea to work really closely with your advisor. The one other point I'll make here is you do need to advance the candidacy before the fellowship period begins. And so in my case, I submitted for the fellowship in November. I was informed that I got the award in March. I advanced to candidacy in June. I began the fellowship in July. So it ended up working out really well for me. It may not necessarily work well for you if you're not working closely with your committee. So that was the point of just sharing that timeline. And I was also asked to just talk a little bit about benefits, but I think I might be over time. So let me just kind of stop there. And I'm so sorry. I will be happy to share more about my experience in terms of benefits. Clearly, you all can see I have lots of advice that I'm always happy to share. So feel free to follow up with me at any point if you want to talk one-on-one.
Thank you so much. Again, wonderful insights and so much more to talk about. And I think, you know, some of those questions might come up in our Q&A today. So thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. We will move on to our final panelist today, Jung Gong. I'll turn it over to you. Start whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. So good afternoon. I'm Gong, a PhD candidate at the Institute of Higher Education at UGA. First of all, thank you to Dr. Stitch, Matt, and Shanna for giving me this great opportunity to share my experience. I applied for the ARA dissertation grant funding when I was a third year in May 2019, and I received the news that I was selected as an awardee for the grant that summer. So I will speak briefly about the ARA doctoral dissertation grants and provide an overview of my dissertation before sharing my experiences and tips for prospective applicants. So according to the ARA Grants Program website, the ARA has supported doctoral dissertations with funding from the NSF and the NCES since 1991. The grants program supports highly competitive dissertation research that uses rigorous quantitative methods and large data sets related to any fields of education. They support the use of major data sets from the US Department of Education's NCES, NSF, or from any other federal agencies. Also, they increase the use of advanced statistical analysis. There are specific guidelines and eligibility requirements. So if you're interested in applying for a grant, you can check the website for more information. The grant program is open to field-initiated research and covers a wide range of topics. It is not limited to STEM-related policy and practice, but includes various subjects related to our stages of education, from early childhood development to adult education. Advanced doctoral students across many fields and disciplines such as economics, psychology, or public policy can apply for the grants. And there are 4 required sections for the grant proposal. The first section is about your research narrative, and you are limited to submitting 4 single-spaced pages, which I believe is similar to the format of an ARA or ASH conference proposal. In addition to the narrative, you are also required to submit a description of your variables, as well as a list of references and a description of your budget. Additionally, you should submit your CV, which must include research and academic employment history, relevant graduate courses in statistics and methodology, publications and presentations, and professional affiliation or memberships. Lastly, a recommendation letter from your primary faculty dissertation advisors is required. Next, I will briefly introduce my ongoing doctoral dissertation. In short, my aim is to examine the impact of early admissions policies on organizational outcomes at 4-year colleges and universities in the US from the perspectives of diversity, selectivity, and affordability. The research question in the quantitative section of my dissertation funded by the AR NSF grant is, do early admissions policies impact institutional outcomes among 4-year institutions in the US? This core question has yielded many additional subordinate research questions and avenues of inquiry. For this project, I use a quasi-experimental research design to examine the causal impact of the policy program intervention on institutional outcomes. To be specific, I utilize difference in differences with a panel analysis to weigh fixed effects using iPads and administrative data from the College Board. These align with the data sets and methods eligibility that the grants program encourages. This grant offers 3 major benefits. So first of all, awardees receive a $25,000 stipend for grant funding. This is not influenced by your assistantships or any other eligible source of funding that you have for your doctoral studies. So you can use this funding for your research, to purchase data if necessary, travel, or just for your own living cost. Additionally, a free extension is available upon request. In my case, the data transfer from the College Board took a long time, so I made use of this free extension. Also, I heard that many recent awardees have requested an extension due to the current pandemic. The next benefit is the participation in the ARA Fall Research Conference in DC. At this event, former and current ARA NSF dissertation grantees, ARA minority dissertation grantees, and researchers and scholars who have received an ARA research grant or fellowship programs will be in attendance. So various presentations, research seminars, and social events will occur over the course of 2 days. The last benefit is that the recipients will be invited to participate in a poster session titled Promising Scholarship in Education Research, Dissertation Fellow, and Their Research at the annual ARA conference, which will include other awardees of grants such as the Spencer Foundation. Additionally, a scholar on the grant board is assigned to each recipient, and they can be conducted regarding any questions related to methodologies or data sets. In my case, Professor Laura Perna at the University of Pennsylvania was assigned to me, and I have been very excited to be able to connect with her. Other than this official benefits, based on my experience, there are several other advantages to applying and receiving the grant. First, when preparing your application, you can review your academic history, products, and experience. So you can identify your own strengths and weaknesses, so to speak, and be better prepared to plan your future. Also, you can utilize this funding application as practice for future grant applications. So even if you're not accepted this time around, I think it will strengthen your application in the future. Next, there are numerous opportunities for networking and future collaboration. At the fall conference in DC and the annual ARA conference, you can meet other grantees from diverse institutions who are pursuing studies in various fields of education. Additionally, you can interact with the scholars and researchers whose work you might have encountered in books and journals, and also you can also learn more about their recent research. Moreover, you can gain inspiration from past grantees, especially those who are in your research-related field. For example, Professor Thomas D., Catherine Strong, and Lindsay Page in the fields of education policy and higher education. Furthermore, you could also have the opportunity to inspire future grantees. This process will also instill motivation as you push forward in your research. Additionally, if you are awarded this grant, you should prepare a progress report and submit the final copy of your dissertation to the board in order to keep yourself on track to finish on time. Finally, this type of national dissertation grant tends to be really rare and competitive, so becoming a grantee may make you more competitive in the job market. This is what I have heard from past awardees and various faculty members. Finally, I think it is helpful to focus on reviewing evaluation criteria and guidelines, regardless of which type of dissertation grant you're applying for. Also, I'd like to mention that all of your academic, research, and professional opportunities and experiences are considered variable in this process. I think the board takes all aspects of applicants' past and current experiences into account along with their future potential. Thus, be grateful and take advantage of any opportunities that you may encounter, even at UGA or a regional conference presentation or a small academic service. Additionally, if you're planning to apply for a grant, perhaps you can seek advice and feedback from your advisor, IH faculty, and colleagues. As mentioned, Dr. Spencer said, and when I applied in 2019, it was hard to find someone to reach out to, but my advisor, Dr. Takushian, did not discourage me, and he never told me that it would be impossible to get this grant. Instead, he told me he really liked my research and supported my topic and ideas and encouraged me to apply for this grant. I really appreciate that, and I achieved success thanks to his advice. And now I want to help any of you who are interested in applying for this grant. So please feel free to reach out to me if I can be helpful to you. So thank you for your time. If you'd like to learn more about experience or my dissertation during your application process, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jung, for your insights as well. Super helpful. So we have some time for Q&A, which is wonderful. And I just want to also personally start by thanking Suzanne and Christina and Sean and Matt for working with me to organize the session. I also want to personally thank each of our amazing panelists for their incredible insights. This session, as Dr. Weis mentioned, is modeled after one that Lois initiated at the University of Buffalo that I participated in this year in offering insights and some tips on my postdoctoral fellowship experiences. And so a very special thanks to my longtime mentor for continuing to model how we might best prepare and position our graduate students for these kinds of opportunities. So thank you so much, Lois, as always. And on that note, well, let's open it up to Q&A. So who would like to start? And Sean, if I miss a hand raise or something, just let me know. Or Matt, if you see that. Yes, Monica.
Yeah, so my question is for Dr. Weis. I want to go back. You made some point about for people who want to do quantitative dissertations and wanting to apply for an award, not wanting to skip like the rigorous methods courses. Can you elaborate more on like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, put very simply, if you come in with a proposal using just descriptive statistics, it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, I mean, there's really, really sophisticated quantitative methods, which I understand, but cannot execute myself. Okay, and people know the difference. That's all I mean by that. You want to take the courses. I don't know what's going on at UGA, but at many institutions, there's sort of, there are people, it's not a negative statement about faculty, but there are people who sort of teach somewhat lighter stats courses that aren't quite as rigorous, and some people want to flow into those courses because they're a bit easier. They don't feel like they're quote unquote good at math or whatever the I mean, that's up to you, but it's not a good idea if you're trying to position yourself for competitive work going forward. It's that simple. Does that clarify? You know,
I'll just translate into, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lois.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, so many times Americans tend to think that when we have this quite bizarre notion that, you know, some people are good at math, some people are not good at math, some people are good at, I mean, not everywhere in the world believes that. You know, people from other countries, families from other countries believes you need to work. And I mean, of course, there's you know, we may be instinctively better at one particular thing than another, but if you don't work at it, you're not going to get any better. So that's where I come from on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add that at the Institute of Higher Ed, that means not being afraid to take Quant 3, which I see Dr. Takushian, who teaches Quant 3, is teaching it in the spring of 2022. So get ready, mark your calendars.
We make all our quant and qual people take this stuff, and I mean in our program, and they help each other. The qual people don't feel very comfortable with quant, and the quant people don't feel very comfortable with qual, and they form a great community. And exactly what a number of other speakers said, you know, everybody's hanging together on this stuff.
Other questions?
I can ask one.
Yes,
so is it simply enough to be trained in those advanced methodologies, or do you actually have to propose one? Or is like on the quant side, like is a multivariable regression analysis sufficient, or are they really expecting quasi-experimental stuff that would be considered more advanced?
That's really they would not expect that quasi-experimental stuff would be considered more advanced. Okay, the extent to which multi-level regression would be, it's all about the question, right? I mean, it's all about the question one is posing. So all I'm saying is we don't want to do sort of stats light. You want to take whatever the course that was mentioned, you know, number 3. You want to take number 3. If this is going to be how you're going to do your research. It's not just about the grant, but it's about your dissertations themselves. Does that answer your question? It's not a particular methodology. It's more that, you know, you go with what's the accepted way, commonly accepted way to answer particular kinds of questions.
I have a question that was submitted prior to the session that I think is a good one to ask. And maybe this is, please everyone weigh in as you see fit, but I think it might be actually best suited for Dr. Weis. So the question is, in addition to having a well-supported good idea, sound design, are there other things that selection committee will be looking for as part of your CV? You mentioned, letter writing as an important feature of the application. Is there anything else that you would say would factor in to a decision?
Okay, I can certainly give you my opinion on that. The CVs that come across our tables are uniformly very impressive, right? I mean, people have good grades, people have experiences. If you're at particular institutions, you've been or work with particular faculty members, you've been on grant teams, people are very careful not just to look at that stuff.
Right.
And because, this is where certain institutions are so well positioned to maximize the next level of opportunities for their students. And that is not okay, in my opinion. I have nothing wrong with those nothing negative at all to say about those big institutions, nothing. But, other people do good work too. And, if you're on whatever, you've been on 3 big grant teams and you have all sorts of publications coming out of those big grant teams because you've been part of the process, that we have to be very careful not to overread that. So I think that's, people, by the way, the personal statements people take very seriously. You want to convince people that there's something about you that is driving you, that you're passionate about with respect to particular sets of issues. And people look very carefully at that. I mean, mainly it's about your proposed work. I think all the speakers said the same thing. But are you in this probably for the long haul? Do you love it? Is there something about you as a human being that drives this particular set of questions where you're likely to be involved in this work for a while? But that's what I would say. I think people sitting around the table are really smart. We can't just fund all the people that have, passed pubs because they were on these teams, because the institutions got those monies. Because that doesn't work out, because not all institutions get all those monies. So that's part of the fight. Dr. Naila Nassour is now president of Spencer Foundation. If you don't know her, she is just amazing. And I know she believes very strongly in this. There's also, I'm going to forget the term. Okay, I'm sorry, I am going to forget it. But there's a new grant with Spencer. I think it's called Research Development Award. I believe that's what it is. And that's something that if you're anybody who's in the top cut, okay, the top whatever of the Spencer Selection Committee deserves that award. It's just that they only have so many. And there's something called a Research Development Award where people can get these awards to be part of the whole process, but they don't get quite as much money. And Katie, you may, I know that's not the award you have, but you may have heard more about this. And I'm a very strong supporter of that award. Spencer's taking very seriously trying to bring in a range of people, and that is a very thing. So just look at the Katie, am I?
The term is correct. It's the research development.
Okay.
So they take the top 35, get the full fellowship, and then there's 6 who get the research development award.
Right.
And they participate and go through the process, but it's significantly less money, but the same experience.
Same experience. Just for all of your information, at least for the present moment, okay, the Research Development Awards are going to be limited only to postdocs, not dissertation students for the present moment, okay? How long will that last? That's another issue entirely. That has to do with, hits on funds because of COVID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that the idea is so people can reapply for the Spencers, but if you're a dissertation student, you may not have time to reapply because you're trying to finish your dissertation. So that was a decision that was recently made.
Wonderful. Other questions? Okay, I have one here in my private chat. Within qualitative work, are certain paradigms advantaged or preferred over others?
What does this individual mean by paradigms? I mean, what an example, for example?
So I think, yeah, I think what the individual is getting at is, are qualitative projects designed in a more kind of positivist or post-positivist way versus those that are, you know, maybe more of a, you know, postmodern, say, let's go on the other end of the spectrum. Are those, you know, preferred more than others? Do you have to sort of sound more quantitative, I think is part of the question,
Emphatically not.
than you would?
Emphatically not. I can say that with all certainty. You're in more dangerous territory when you're applying to NSF. You have to be a little
Right.
careful with how you state things.
Right.
But I still wouldn't call them positivist. But you have to be a little more careful. This sounds like dangerous territory, and there's obviously stuff underneath this that I don't know anything about. So I'm going to stop here. But no, there is no. All
Yeah,
sorts
absolutely.
of projects have been funded.
Yeah.
You still have to, you know, think of yourself sitting at a table. Would you really fund something where the method is not clear? And the answer is no, you wouldn't.
That's right.
Right. So that's the extent.
Other questions?
I mean, personally, I just really love to hear from all of you. It was great. So thank you for inviting me and letting me hear what everybody's saying. It's really very interesting and important.
And I'll just add, likewise, it's honestly really great to have someone with some insider knowledge. I feel like most of the questions that have come in so far, you know, I can give you perspective of someone who has applied for dissertation funding and potentially give you some more insight from applying for and failing to receive funding as a faculty member, but I can't really tell you what it's like to be on the other end of the equation. So we thank everyone for really being here today and providing this insight.
Let me say one more thing on targeted projects on underrepresented peoples and what have you. Let me put to rest the idea that there is one paradigm there, to use that line. That is not true. There has been plenty of different stuff funded. And, you know, not everything's funded. I mean, the Spencer hit rate is low, like all of these projects, right? It's low. But it's not that only, well, you've got a bunch of troglodytes sitting at the table. They're not invited to sit at the table, to be perfectly honest with you.
Right.
They're just not there. And I mean, one of the criteria for sitting at the selection committee, and I know this for a fact, okay, is that you can listen to other people and that you have an open mind for the diversity of perspectives and practices in a field. You still have to have a method, and it has to be clearly outlined, and I think that's fair. Historians, philosophers, they have a method too. They just don't have to articulate it in quite the same way because it's so conventional, everybody knows what it is.
Right.
One other thing, everybody, please, you know, every time I go to AERA or wherever I go to every single funding session because I want to hear what's up. I also listened to the webinars. I had a hand in the Spencer one, although now they probably changed it, so I don't know what it says now, but I'm sure it's the same issues that were, a lot of the same issues that we're talking about here. But I go to every single one because I want to hear what the funders are saying. It's why we had the funders sitting at the table when we did the mixed methods, because they're critical. So I really strongly encourage you to go to those sessions. Spencer has like 3 or 4 of them. AERA has them, they all have them. And NSF, IES, every single one of those people.
That's great
That's what you
advice.
learn, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yep.
That is really great advice. The one thing I will say is if you try to attend one of those sessions when we are actually doing the conference in person, please plan to go early because you
Yes.
will not find a seat otherwise.
everybody is there. Yes.
Everyone.
Yeah.
And they're very honest. I mean, they'll tell you what their, what the deal is here.
I'm going to ask one more question just because I've got one.
Great, Matt.
From how competitive are these dissertation? Like, what's the numerator? What's the denominator? I'm just curious.
That's a really, I don't know for the other funding agencies, but I do know for Spencer. However, I'm not going to remember. And I tried to look it up before this session because I knew somebody would ask me that. But if I remember correctly, Spencer dissertation runs, I even hate to speak because I may be wrong, but I'm guessing that it's approximately 9% that are funded of those that come in, not 9% that come to the table. Okay, but 9% of those. But again, that's just sort of a stab. I believe that's approximately right.
I remember.
But you don't get it if we don't apply for it, right?
I can actually speak because Spencer tells you as I went through it. So, and I apologize for interrupting. When the initial app gets submitted, they had about 480 applicants, but in the first kind of round of, they weed out all the whatever. Then for the semifinalists, they weed it all down to about 58. And then from 58 people, they select for semi-finalists, and then from there it goes down to 35, and then plus the 6 additional people for the.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That sounds right to me. I believe
so if that helps. But
you can always apply again, especially for postdocs, everybody.
Yeah.
Docs, you don't have much time, because you're trying to finish at the same time that you're. So sometimes it's not feasible, but not always, especially if you didn't put pilot data on the quant/qual pilot data on the table. You have the opportunity to reapply, and you're going to stand a much better chance of getting funded.
I'll also point out that, you are always encouraged, I think, or should be encouraged to apply for multiple opportunities. There are lots of folks who apply to multiple dissertation funding opportunities and often will have to decline one. I also just so happen to know one faculty, well, she's currently a faculty member, but when she was in grad school, she initially received the AERA Minority Dissertation Award that I received as well, but she had not finished her dissertation by the end of that fellowship year and was encouraged by AERA to apply for the Spencer. Actually, I know 2 people in which that was the case. So it does happen occasionally, every blue moon, where sometimes people will get more than one.
Impressive.
Do you mind if I ask a question? The individual who asked about the paradigm, do you want to say more about that? Of course, don't mention any particular faculty member. You don't have to, but
he put it in the chat because he's ill after receiving his 2nd vaccine. So he's here, but he's kind of not here. Colin, I don't know if you feel comfortable saying anything more about that.
Please. I mean, insofar as my experience, I can only speak from my experience.
I mean, I can talk probably better than I look. So
thanks, Colin.
Really, just I get the vibe in a lot of different fields of study at least within qualitative research, is that typically it is seen as a post-positivist kind of worldview where the data are clearly objective, that you're finding them and that you're not really involved in any of the construction of that data, seems to be more of the approach in a lot of different fields. And so as I think about what it might look like to go for a grant of some kind, I think of myself as a critical scholar and someone who is an interpretivist or a constructivist, and very much see myself as a research tool that is interpreting the data rather than the data being kind of having latent meanings that are just need to be uncovered. So as I think of that, that's kind of what I'm getting at of, are they expecting you to be I am a scientist, I have no bias and I will absolutely set those aside, or more of no, I'm going to challenge the system and I'm looking at multiple interpretations of this data?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like I say, I've been on the committee. It is very commonly agreed upon now that we have a hand in constructing our data, our interpretations, whatever, as qualitative people. So I've never met in any place that I've sat. Okay, I sit at the tables as a selection person. I have been a mentor and a senior scholar on the panels and so forth at most of these, at almost all of the retreats since 2015, I think, maybe 16. I have never met what you're talking about, ever. So I guess I would have to say again, emphatically, that's not the case. A question is whether I mean, even if one does have that sort of post-positivist notion of sort of, data are out there and we just don't have any, it wouldn't really enter into the proposals anyway. I mean, it's not the purpose of the proposal to get into those kinds of debates. But I know the people, I know the qual people who've sat in all these capacities that I've been involved in, and I don't know anybody like what you're describing. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's hard, like Katie said, it's hard to get these things. I mean, if you do the calculations, am I right, Katie, something like 7%? Yeah, I mean, it's just hard. So sometimes we think we don't get something because we have a particular orientation, but that's not necessarily the case at all. That's not the filter. The filter is just that there were 475 applicants and Spencer's only award, they only have money for 35 plus the 6 quote unquote development awards. So I think I wouldn't worry about that. Again, you have to have a credible methodology. You have to convince people that that you're not just randomly choosing people when you interview them. They represent something. So I hope you feel better.
Wonderful. I know.
No, I mean, not just about what I say, I mean about your health, is what I mean. I hope that helps.
And about the paradigm thing.
You would, I mean, I can't tell you who has sat on those committees, but they would be people that you would not put in the category you're talking about.
Right.
In my fellowship cohort, there is a handful of people who identify as critical scholars. So I know firsthand they do get funded. I don't know what their proposals look like, but that is a thing, and it was funded.
Yeah, Spencer in particular, I think, is really open to all approaches and methodologies and paradigms, if you will. And they fund arts-based research, which tends to be on kind of, in terms of grant funding, the periphery in terms of these larger funding agencies. But Spencer in particular, Lois, it sounds really to me open. From my own experiences.
Good research.
Yeah.
So one other thing, everybody, it's not the case that people at particular institutions can pump their people at the selection committee. They cannot even be in the room when people from their own institution are up. They cannot, and there's no backroom dealing on that. I've never seen anything like that. And you're just not allowed to be in the room when anybody from your own institution comes forward. So I think you all would be impressed with the process, actually.
So now you all have to apply.
We don't lose anything by
that's right.
It's going to take your work forward anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I just say, just related to this topic of how competitive this all is, with that being said, it's hard. Rejection is hard for all of us. We experience it all the time in our particular profession when it comes to papers and everything else. But I have found it from my experience. I went to an institution where a large, majority of folks that I started my program with were competing for these awards every year, and most people don't get them. So it's one of the reasons why I made the point earlier, like, hey, form just a committee of colleagues in which you can have some degree of social and emotional support, because most people don't get it, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth trying. And so I would encourage you to be prepared to do the hard work if you're going to do it, and take it seriously, because it is a lot of work, but it is worth doing, I think.
Absolutely. Well said. Sadly, we're out of time. And this has just been an incredible panel. Thank you so much to our panelists. Just wonderful. And, as many of us have said, feel free to continue to reach out, talk to us here at IHE. We're more than happy to continue to have discussions about grant funding and other opportunities that are out there as well. And some that, all of these things are competitive, but some that might be a little less competitive than, say, Spencer or AERA. There's a lot of different opportunities out there. So thanks so much, everyone, for hanging out on a Friday afternoon. Thanks again to our panelists. It's been so wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It was great. Bye, everybody.
And thank you so much, Katie and Lois, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Happy to do it.
Fun.
Great
Good
to see
luck,
everybody.
guys.
Nice meeting you.